G'day and welcome back to my final Space Engineers video for 2017. We've seen some pretty amazing updates to the game this year. We've seen the death of the dev branch and the death of the dev menu, so I can't change the time of day easily without getting a mod, but there is a mod for that, which will be in the description. We've seen the addition of a new HUD to the game. We've seen the introduction of multi-threaded physics. We've seen the introduction of these drop pods so that we can get our extra skins, which have been introduced. And we've seen parachutes, we've seen half blocks. We've even seen J.J. Abrams take over the art department with these crazy over-the-top solar flares. But rather than talk about all of those changes that happened this year, I want to talk about what I'd like to see from Space Engineers next year. What I want to see from Keen in 2018. And most of the things I'd like to see are actually fairly small. Or at least the first few we're going to go through are fairly small. One big thing that drives me nuts in games is when you set something to be one way and every time you reload you have to reset it. It's frustrating to have to go through that procedure every time. And the best example of that in Space Engineers right now is auto rotate. Why does this thing stay on when I reload the game? It should go away. I don't want this sort of behavior with my cockpit. I want it off, and I want it to stay off when I reload the game. I don't use the functionality, and I actually find it often quite distracting and frustrating. There might be people who like it, so I don't want it to be removed from the game. What I would like to see is that my options, when I set them, persist. Please, Keen, please, please get rid of the resetting auto rotate function. Another thing I'd really like to see is some sort of organization or tree structure or something that happens within the control panel menu here. When you've got multiple ships attached to a grid like you would on a base, you end up with orange, yellow, and other colored blocks in this list, and the list gets very, very crowded. It can become quite difficult to find stuff within it, and I think there's two things that would be really nice to see here. One, having it organized so that you can have grids separated into chunks. So even if there isn't a tree structure here, if at least I can say sort by subgrid, it will show all of the white ones first, then all of the orange, then all of the yellow, then all of the green, etc., etc. That may make it at least a little bit easier to find what you're after. And the other thing I'd like to see is the ability to turn off the visibility of subgrids so that you only see the main grid if that's what you want to do. Just another little visibility option up here that would allow me to see only the blocks and modules on the grid I'm accessing. That'd be a really handy quality of life update that, like the auto rotate thing, isn't the biggest problem, but it's those little frustrations, and if you can improve them, it can dramatically improve the flow of the game, and it'd be really, really awesome to see. When Keen introduced all of the new skins, I thought they missed something that would have been really, really nice. While yes, it's kind of cool to be able to look like a lava man, or look like a skeleton, or look like any sort of other crazy thing like a ghost or whatever, it'd be really nice to be able to have a female engineer. Or a different face on the male engineer, or both. Having some sort of differentiation in appearance of the face, and even if with the female engineer like this modded one, it still has the same run animation, it still has the same suit, that's probably acceptable considering the fact that, well, inside a spacesuit, you can't really tell much of a difference. Maybe they could make the size slightly smaller, but it probably doesn't need to. And yes, those of you who are animators and artists would know that due to the different hip structures and pelvis structures, men and women do run slightly differently. Does it really matter if they can't add that? But if they could add that, that would be really, really cool. I would be very happy if they managed to add something like that to the game, and it would actually make a meaningful addition to all of the skins that we've got. But if they do introduce a female engineer, I think it'd be unreasonable to make it a skin that we have to unlock. I think instead it should be part of the base game, and then they could add a whole lot of other different bits that go with it, or a whole lot of other faces that instead of having them by default, you could add all the different faces and all the different other options as extra skins, because that's something I would really like to see. During 2017, the modders have actually come up with some amazing PvE content. From Duck Roll's Escape from Mars scenario, where you could take on ground-based assaults, there was all sorts of scripted events, there were amazing different things that went on. I would really like to see some of that sort of thing added to the vanilla game. And Meridius 9 has shown how that can be done, particularly with two of his mods, one of them being the planetary cargo ships, which there's none currently visible where I'm sitting at the moment. Oh, one just spawned in. There we go, the Space Pirate Instinct, atmospheric frigate. Things like that spawning in atmosphere, and even more impressively, or something they should really add to the vanilla game, is something like what he's used in order to get the scouting outpost that's off in the distance there to spawn in the planet voxels, so that we can have bases that are procedurally created in the game. That would be really, really nice. I think it would go a long way to making Space Engineers feel more alive when you're playing on your own, and make it feel like there's a reason for you to move on from wherever your first base is, aside from when you finally manage to mine out all of the nearby resources. As some of you might know, I also make a bit of machinima for Space Engineers, and while having a wave, having a crazy dance, having a thumbs up, and having a facepalm do go a long way in terms of making the characters appear more alive, it'd be really nice to be able to have more animations. And I don't expect Keen to add those themselves. What I'd like instead is for Keen to do something that they've actually talked about doing, which is increasing the documentation available and increasing the guides available for the different modding and scripting opportunities that Space Engineers have. So in terms of the animations, I'd really like to see an updated guide so that maybe I could even try and make my own. But I am so lost when it comes to looking at what's there that I've got no hope whatsoever in terms of making those sorts of animations. So it'd be really nice if Keen did get around to adding some sort of guide to that in the next year. Multiplayer in Space Engineers is something that seems to always be brought up when people start talking about what needs to be improved in Space Engineers to make it a game that people want to play. And I agree, it would be really nice to see some improvements in multiplayer, and thankfully Keen have actually said they are going to improve it further. And we have seen big improvements in multiplayer. There are big examples from people like Wasted Space, who's managed to make a series of engineer wars which would not have been possible prior to some of the more recent multiplayer updates, and particularly the ones that happened in the past year. So while it does have a long way to go in terms of being playable in a persistent state from a dedicated server, it's still come a long way from where it was. So I have faith that Keen can come up with something that will make multiplayer a really fun experience for everyone involved, and hopefully a few less wheels bouncing around and behaving like they're trying to be the modern version of a tumbleweed. Adding AI content to games like Space Engineers makes a big difference to the single player experience, and for me adds a lot of value to the co-op experience as well. I don't tend to play PvP much, as particularly in a game like Space Engineers, I get very attached to my constructions and I don't like to see them get blown up. So if I'm able to play with my friends and make constructions together that we can then face off against AI, that is a lot of fun for me. And on the note of constructions to face off against AI with, I'd really like to see a vanilla version of this rover style cockpit, something with the windows facing downward so that you can have a rover that is mostly protected from above with armor, like I designed this one. It'd be really, really nice to see something like that added to the game, particularly in the vanilla style, as Marek seems to be trying to bring all of the art style back to something cohesive. So adding a new cockpit that fits that style that also has the glass facing downward, I think would be a really useful addition. And it's more than just aesthetic, it's actually functional because it allows you to do armor like I was just mentioning. I've never been a big fan of the wolves in the game. They've never really added much to how I play the game, and maybe that could be improved as well if they're trying to improve the PvE content. One way you could improve the function of the wolves would be, instead of using them as a spawn everywhere, just attack you randomly sort of device, maybe instead have them spawn in a group from a particular location like the drones do, and have them attack you from that direction. So if you want to protect yourself against the wolves, you can go find their lair and destroy it, or clear it out, so that then you'll have reduced spawns for a while. That would be a more interesting and more gameplay heavy way of introducing the wolves to the game, and for me it'd give more reason to actually even have them in the game, because I usually don't, as they don't actually add anything meaningful other than intermittent frustration with my turrets constantly shooting their dead corpses, or those brief moments when you gain some useful component from it. But to my mind, that's just not enough. Some other thing would be really, really amazing. While going through all of the autopilot stuff this year, I've understood to a greater extent why we can't yet have auto mining drones. And from what I understand of it, and as you all know, I'm no programmer, so I might be wrong here, but the major issue is that the game doesn't allow the ore detectors to share the locations of the ore they've actually found to a programmable block. So the programmable blocks can't actually see that ore that's been found. And because they can't see that ore that's been found, you can't program an autopilot to chase that location and to drill it out. But if we had that ability, then we'd be able to make our own auto mining drones, and that would be pretty cool. I would really like to have that sort of thing added to the game, as it would give a meaningful use to your autopilot drones. I hope you guys had a great 2017 and are looking forward to an even better 2018. I know I've got a lot of things that I'm looking forward to next year, and hopefully one or two of them will be some of these additions to the game that I have my fingers crossed for. If you've got your own ideas and own things that you'd love to see in Space Engineers next year, let me know in the comments. And if you've got links to the Keen suggestion forum where you've either voted for someone else's suggestion that you like, or have your own suggestion that you'd like people to see, make sure you post them in the comments as well. I'm going to be trying to find as many of the suggestions that I've put here that already exist on the suggestion forum. I'll be posting those links in the description. I'll also post in the description a link to a collection of female space engineers mods that are on the workshop. Some are better than others, but all of them give you a bit of variety, and there's even some different faces you can find for the astronauts if you look hard enough. I'd like to say a big thank you to everyone who's liked, who's commented, who's watched any of my videos this year. I've had an amazing time making them, and I'm really looking forward to making a whole lot more next year. More tutorials, more Let's Plays, and hopefully a whole lot more machinima too. So have a happy 2018, and I'll see you then.